So South Africa has been, as Catherine said earlier, has been leading the way in some respects in terms of producing guidelines for ESG reporting via their SAM ESG guideline, which was developed in 2017, I believe. And SAM, as a result of that, they've actually received an honours award by the United Nations Intergovernmental Working Group of Experts in International Standards in recognition of the SAM ESG's role in promoting sustainability reporting. So congratulations for that. And I'm sure that we've all got a lot that we can learn from you guys. So let's hear what you have to say. Thanks, Sarah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, John. So Teresa and Tania, I'm not going to say this is where it all began, because I think all of us have been thinking ESG for many years, but you guys have done an absolutely fantastic job by getting it written down, getting it out there, and actually testing it, and then building on everything that has been learnt with regards to that. So Tania, maybe if I can come to yourself first, do you want to provide a more of an update with regards to what's happened within South Africa, and also where you're going?
Okay. Well, like most organizations, we're looking to remain relevant within the minerals industry. We're looking to assist our members, whether it be small junior companies, whether it be explorationists, whether they be large mining companies. We want to make everything relevant to people who are actually out there working in the field. And we have a lot of individuals or companies here in South Africa who are not rich companies. They have very limited budgets. And so we're trying to help these ones to be able to apply all of the modifying factors when determining a resource or even a reserve. And one of the things that has been done over the last couple of years, and lately driven very much by Teresa, has been the ESG. And so what we're trying to do with this is to sensitize everybody to the importance of ESG, almost making them want to voluntarily report on ESG features. And so some of the things that Teresa is doing with the new update on her guideline is to show how it's applicable in the exploration stage, and also how it's applicable in mining. A comment made earlier by the Australians is that these are two completely different areas of application. And this is one of the challenges that we're finding as well.
Yeah, so that making sure that it's applicable across the whole breadth of that value chain, and then I guess as well across all of the different types of commodity and types of operation, for example, that we have within our world. That's brilliant, Tania. Teresa, do you want to build on what Tania's just said? She's mentioned your name in vain there. I suspect there's some extra items of information you'd like to share.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so we have our SAMES guideline, which, as John mentioned, sort of became officially part of the SAMCODES suite of codes from 2017. Development of it started in about 2013, 2014. And the guideline exists as a guideline because it provides clarity to CPs on how to go about integrating ESG into their reporting. We've recognized over time, as a result of people using it, that perhaps it doesn't give enough guidance. It sort of has the technical requirements of what we would want to see, but it doesn't necessarily help the person in the field understand what that means, especially if you're a CP who isn't from an ESG background. So what we're working on now is really saying at each point along the value chain, what does it mean? What kind of information should you be accessing it? In certain instances, where can you find that information that's freely and publicly available to help you understand, for example, your environmental or social risks in more detail? And then how do you actually apply that? Because ultimately, SAMESC is looking for integrated determination of resources and reserves. And you can only do that by sort of distilling the huge amount of information that exists within the world of sustainability reporting and looking at it through the lens of mineral resource and reserve reporting. And it's a challenge. And as with any of these things, once you really get stuck into it, the devil's always in the detail. So, you know, there's technical terms and processes within the CRISCO/SAMREC codes. And when you're looking at it from an ESG perspective, we're now trying to say, well, actually, how can we better align what we're asking of competent persons, given that these are the processes that they are used to using, and how can we dovetail with that? As a result of this process and all the conversations that we're having today, we may find that there's a sort of a push from a different direction, is to say to CRISCO, well, you know, from an ESG perspective, perhaps these concepts might need to be relooked at. The governance versus governmental within the modifying factors definition is probably one of those. But there's certainly others from a nitty-gritty detail, and we're trying to sort of, in our own minds, distill that at the moment as part of our update to the SAMESC guideline.
Brilliant. Thank you, Teresa. And thank you, Tania, for that. So I guess because SAMESC, which is SAM and then ESG, so this is how all of the South African codes, etc. work, just in case you're wondering, because you guys have had yours out for a little while, and going back to perhaps some of the comments that were made by Pak Buddy from Indonesia, for example, where he talked about the consequences of truly incorporating ESG into, I guess, the calculation of the resources and the reserves. Have you seen any kickback from companies with regards to this? Because one assumption might be that when you incorporate ESG, does that then shrink the size of what might be the resource or reserve that had previously been declared? Have you seen any of that come through, or is it too early?
I think it's too early. We haven't seen as much adoption of the SAMESC guideline to the extent that we would like. And I do think part of that is because the guideline doesn't provide enough guidance. You know, it sets out sort of what you want to see, but not necessarily how to go about doing it. We did a review of some of the competent persons reports from the 2019 financial year last year. And we found there that there were a couple of projects that had done it well in terms of not really more financial sensitivity modeling, but on a range of different scenarios that were influenced by, particularly in this case, it was environmental criteria. And that's the kind of vision that we have for the future, is our picture annual reports that are updated with a mineral reserve graph that shows how the mineral reserve has changed from last year to this year, or perhaps over the last 10 years. And somewhere on this waterfall graph, because it's usually a waterfall graph, there's a little bar that says, you know, environmental. And there's a further explanation as to what that means. And it could be positive or it could be negative. You know, what a company does on the ground in terms of their ESG, particularly environmental and social performance, should give them benefits in the future. There may be an initial contraction of a reserve because we recognize, for example, that there's a sensitive area that we're going to stay away from. But as perhaps maybe the company demonstrates that they're able to do better quality rehabilitation that could help restore that sensitive environment, they may be able to mine there under stringent conditions, because the government, the investors, the host communities have increased their confidence in the ability of the mining company to actually deliver good performance. So that's what we would like to actually see happening in practice, but we're not there yet.
Well, I mean, at least you've started so that we can begin to see which bits are working and then where improvements can be made. So I just, in closing, what is your expected timeline in terms of the next steps, so we can all be aware of them?
So we're hoping to, by the end of this year, have an updated SAMESC guideline that we can share with the broader community for input. we were gratefully involved in or able to comment on PERC's update now, which is fantastic. When SAMCODES was developed, we didn't do the sort of broader public consultation process. And I think at the time it was the right decision. But now that, you know, many of the codes are more formally looking at ESG, that we're in touch with each other via Crisco and forums such as this, it's the ideal opportunity to send what we're thinking out into the community and get broader input. Obviously, at the end of the day, like PERC and JORC and all the rest of us doing these updates, we'll come up with a final document that works for the South African stakeholders. But we're acutely aware, obviously, that many companies are listed on more than one stock exchange. And so how we integrate as a broader Crisco community and how we align requirements across the different stock exchanges actually helps the users of these codes at the end of the day, who are already subjected to extreme reporting burdens.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much for that, Teresa. And as you can see there, Teresa and Tania actually answering some of the questions that have been coming through as well. So it's almost as if you've been keeping tabs on some of the Q&A that's been going on. Our lovely South Africans will be joining us again later on this afternoon.
And hello again, South Africa. Hope you've had a good day since we met earlier. I've been chewing over what we talked about this morning quite a lot, and I think you guys came up with some really good points to think about. Just to introduce SAMCODES a little bit. There's several codes in South Africa used for reporting of mineral resources. SAMREC is the one that us mineral geologists or exploration geologists are most familiar with. A couple of key things here is that SAM ESG was developed by SAMCODES specifically to provide standardized systematic framework for reporting of ESG matters. So that's been a really valuable resource for everybody within the Crisco family, and it was so good that they were awarded in 2009 they were awarded a honours award by the United Nations Intergovernmental Working Group for the realisation of the UN SDGs, the UN Sustainability Goals. So well done on that. That's really brilliant, and some good recognition there as to how the minerals industry can contribute to the SDGs, which is a really important matter. Just building on some of the points that you made this morning, I think it was some key things that stood out for me was a need to incentivize people to want to report on ESG. I think that's a really good point, which hopefully will bring in these sorts of matters at an earlier stage of the cycle. And that also builds on your comment and Ed's comment as well, that it needs to be applicable across the value chain, by which I interpret that to mean from the earliest stages of exploration all the way through to post-closure. So I think that's some consensus there on bringing in these factors throughout the exploration and mine development cycle. So yeah, thanks for those thoughts, and looking forward to hearing some more.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. Tania, I'm going to come straight to yourself again and just ask you for any opening comments, and perhaps explain to all of us what is SAMCODES, SAM-ESG, SAM everything else, just so that we can get our head around this landscape. And then I'll pass across to Teresa, perhaps for some more detail on the ESG side.
Okay, the SAMCODES is the South African Mineral Reporting Codes. It's a family of codes, and you can see in the list behind me, we look at the SAMREC, which is the resource and reserve estimating, and there's the SAMVAL, which is the valuation of mineral assets. We also have SAMOG, which is the oil and gas reporting section. So all of these three individual codes fall under the umbrella body, the South African umbrella body of SAMCODES. In addition to these three reporting codes, we also have two guideline documents. One is the SAM-ESG that we're talking about today, and the other one is the reporting of diamond and other precious stones. That also falls directly under SAMREC, and it's just one of the commodity-specific reporting guidelines that Ed was also talking about in his presentation. Our latest update was in 2016, when we combined everything under the SAMCODES banner. And one of the things that we concentrate on is trying to help our members understand what it is that they need to report and how best to do it. And in line with what we're talking about here today with guidance from ESG issues, we're also looking at the importance of providing guidance for other modifying factors, and specifically the integrated risk management, something that we also feel is lacking in many of the codes and has a great deal to do with information recovered from the ESG factors. As we mentioned earlier, another thing that we're concentrating on is how to sensitize our competent persons to the importance of ESG. We want people to comply with ESG, not simply because it's the right thing to do or because somebody has a big stick, but rather because it's something that they believe ought to be reported on in a responsible and sensible manner. Teresa and her committee have been doing a huge amount of work over the last couple of years, trying to make the SAMESC more applicable to all stakeholders, the big companies, the small companies, the juniors, the people with low budgets, the explorationists, and all the people that we've been speaking about. And that's exactly what they're doing at the moment, is updating this to make it more applicable across the board. And I will now shut up and Teresa can carry on.
No, please don't shut up, Tania, because there's so much more that we could glean from you. But yes, let's take this opportunity to pass across to Teresa to maybe explain in a bit more detail what's been going on the environment, social and governance side.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Tania. So yes, just one point to note, as Tania mentioned, obviously SAMESC is a guideline that supports the SAMCODES and is directly referenced at the moment in SAMVAL, and we're busy working on improving the references within SAMREC. We are also working with the SAMOG guys, but their process is quite different to obviously a hard rock mineral resources and reserves, and so we'll likely need to have a tailored section of SAMESC that sort of provides the guidance that the oil and gas guys need. But one of the advantages that we have of SAMESC being a guideline and not part of the actual codes is that we have a lot more flexibility to update the guideline on a regular basis, which is what we're obviously doing at the moment. Because we're a supporting document, we provide clarity and information, and we don't have to jump through the JSC sort of approval process in terms of getting the guideline updates approved. So we can be a lot more nimble in our updates, which is great for processes like this where all of us around the world are having these conversations and thinking about what to do. We have the flexibility to try and make SAMESC as up to date, you know, as it can be to meet the needs of its users. So as Tania mentioned, we are doing an update at the moment. The committee is working on trying to provide a lot more guidance for people. We've got a lot of technical requirements that are in SAMESC at the moment. I think anyone who's read SAMESC will agree that it is very repetitive the way it stands right now, and we're aware of that. We were trying to sort of say that it's very similar information that you need across the value chain, but at perhaps different levels of detail. But we're trying to say, okay, well, so what? If you have all this information, what does it actually mean for a CPR, for example? So that's the work that we're doing at the moment in conjunction with our sister committees under the SAMCODES umbrella.
So in terms of your focus on, okay, so what does this actually mean? Can you give us an example, perhaps in terms of some of the areas that might be changing, or is it too early to do that?
So it is too early, and we've sort of really got a very rough straw dog. We've taken the existing SAMESC, torn it apart, and tried to look at a different structure that would make it more user-friendly. But we're really trying to address some of the challenges between what SAMREC requires and how we can address that from a SAMES perspective. Yeah, that's really the goal at the moment. And similarly with SAMVAL, because there's processes that SAMVAL undertakes that SAMES would like to feed into, and we just need to make sure that we put things on the right hooks to, as it were, to make the process, work better.
So with that, and final question, Teresa, for yourself before I come across to Roger, with SAMESC being a guideline rather than a core part of the code, does it have enough teeth to make it work and get people to use it? As in that balancing act of almost stick versus flexibility. How do you see that?
Yeah, so the stick part is not something that we have at the moment. And there's pros and cons on both sides. As you say, flexibility versus not having the stick. We are working to provide some carrots to incentivize people to align with SAMES. And to that end, it's socializing it amongst the various stakeholders across various platforms, so not only with the competent persons, but also with the investors. So they can be asking the questions of people who are writing these reports to say that, there's the SAMES guideline, why aren't you using it? The information would be of value to us. Tackle it from both sides. And then, as I say, a carrot to some kind of recognition for those companies that do it well. I see Tania wants to say something, I think.
Yeah, no, Tania, please hop in on that.
If I can just add on that, there's also discussions with the SAMREC committee to add certain is the base requirements from SAMESC into SAMREC, into the code itself. And so as Teresa said, one of the benefits of the guideline is that you can have both requirements as well as industry best practice. And then we'd like to take some of the requirements into the code, which will hopefully give it the teeth that you were talking about.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And that's absolutely fantastic to hear. Just in terms of the carrot side of this, and apologies for anybody whose first language is not English. We're using lots of strange terms, but we've got one of our TAME representatives from the investment community who's just joined us, and we'll come to him later on just to hear how that carrot may be getting sweeter. And at that point, I'm going to stop with these analogies and just pass across to Roger, who is Mr. Crisco at the moment. Now, Roger, we're going to come back to you in a Crisco capacity, but given your location, etc., is there anything that you want to say with regards to the South African approach to all of this?
No, I will add a couple of things. Firstly, that we're very proud of our ESG guidelines and the awards that they've been given by the UN. And then I think Tania did speak about integrated risk management. I think that there is scope for having a separate section on integrated risk management. And then what has been spoken about as well is and it's particularly applicable, I think, in the African situation, is that these guidelines and standards must be in the context of the area in which they are implemented. The size of the companies, the state of the project, the area. I mean, let's be honest, Western Europe is a lot different to the DRC and Cameroon and the likes of that. So you've got to take that into consideration when you're drawing up these standards. And then other ones which I will talk about on a Crisco basis. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Roger. I should also note for everybody listening in that whilst in my other half of my life, I run an integrated risk management consultancy, I did not plant any of that with the South African team, but that's very, very exciting to hear that that's one of those components coming through. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to invite you to put your hands together on the other side of your microphones and say thank you very much to Tania, Teresa and Roger.